Hugh asked me to give a talk about the stuff I've been tweeting about randomly and blogging a bit about getting old magazines and putting them on the Internet Archive. And I've just been doing this for about 2 or 3 months, so it's kind of new to me. I thought I'd share what I've learned along the way. It all started back in February when Jason Scott on Twitter, who works at the Internet Archive, who I follow, put out a tweet asking is any Australians who can scan magazines. Now, at that point, I did not know how to scan magazines. I did not have a scanner. I'd never done it before, but I wanted to, and I thought this is a good time to start. And so I said, yes, I can do it. I have a nice scanner. I didn't have a nice scanner. And he hooked me up with a guy who lives in Geelong, which is actually not that far from me. So a guy who lives in New York put a tweet out saying anybody in Australia, can they pick up some magazines? And I happen to live like about a 40-minute drive from his place, which is pretty cool. So that was handy. And I also had another friend who lives in Melbourne who saw me reply to that tweet and said, oh, I've got a bunch of magazines, old Macworld magazines. Would you want to scan those too? I said yes. And that ended up with me having a massive pile of magazines to suddenly scan. I didn't know how to do it. I did not have a scanner, but I figured now's a good time to start. I managed to pick up this scanner quite cheap off Facebook Marketplace. It's a Canon DR6050C, and you can tell it's pretty big. It's got a 300-page sheet feeder as opposed to like 25 or 50 in most scanners. And it's stupidly fast. It's worth, when it was new, it was about $15,000 new. You can buy them secondhand for about $2.5. I got this one off some hippies in the Yarra Valley for like $50. They had no idea what it was. They had no clue that it even worked. But I went out there, picked it up, and it worked great. So that was a nice bargain. And I picked up this paper cutter. So this paper cutter can hold 500 sheets, and it's just basically a big guillotine. You pop the thing you want to cut under the blade, pop the blade down, and it'll slice the papers clean right through. And you can see there's a blade as well, so the blade comes out so it can be sharpened. So after all that and a bit of Googling, I had a setup going on. I had an old Windows PC, my scanners that I found around the place, one that Epson gave me to borrow, one that Canon I found on Gumtree for like $15, which was great. The one I got from the Yarra Valley, and this Fujitsu one, which is horrible, which I'll talk about later, is from Bendigo for $5, and it was a disaster. But I'll talk about that later. So the first step is to actually cut the spine off the magazine, and the reason I do this is because it destroys the magazine, unfortunately, so you can't really read it like how you used to before. But it makes it so much easier to scan than taking a photo of each page or trying to put it down in a flatbed scanner. If you ever tried to photocopy a book, imagine doing that for like 150 pages. It's just not going to work. So you really need to cut the spine off so you have the loose pages. Then you can feed that into the scanner and it works well. As a tip for anyone who wants to start, you really do need to fan the pages and flick through each page, because I've had glue stuck. I've had static hold the pages together. So when it goes into the scanner, it goes through as one page, and you miss out what's in those other pages. And you really need to kind of fan it out, give it a good shake, and get it nice and loose. Otherwise, the scanner will just feed in 2 or 3 or even 4 pages all at once. So then the next step is to configure the scanner, and this is where things are going to be interesting, because on older scanners, their drivers don't work on modern operating systems, even though they say that they do, and they often don't. So that's not very fun. Like especially on the Mac, a lot of the older drivers, they're like a universal binary, and they haven't changed. That's very old, like a PowerPC and an Intel binary in the one thing, and they just don't load. So yeah, so it's making the drivers work is half the challenge. But if the drivers do work, you can set it to a whole bunch of settings, and there's some important ones that you need to take note of. You want at least 600 dpi. That's kind of the recommended archival resolution, because that will allow it to be printed again at kind of one-to-one quality. Anything less is kind of, you're making it smaller than what was the original copy, and you're kind of wasting your time if you haven't got a 600 DPI scanner. And you also want TIFF, so that way they're not compressed files. So when you're taking it straight off the scanner, you're getting pretty much one-to-one bits off the scanner's imaging system. There's no kind of compression or modifications being done by the scanner. It's just, you just want the raw image from the lens of the scanner onto your computer. You also want, if your scanner has these options, there's an option often to prevent bleed through and to remove the background. So if you get like a normal A4 sheet of paper, sometimes the scanner's light can be too bright for the image, and so you actually see the back page through the front page, and it's very annoying. Whereas some scanners have this option where they'll actually automatically adjust the brightness of their scanning light so that it doesn't make it too bright, so that it shines through the page. And that's a very handy feature. Some of the older scanners don't have this, and a lot of multifunction center scanners don't have that either. So you end up with this horrible looking images where you can see the reverse page, and you have to manually go through each one and fix it up, and it's a pain in the ass. So if a scanner can do that on its own for you, it saves a lot of time. And some scanners have double feed detection, and they actually have like a little ultrasonic sensor inside the scanner. So when a sheet passes through, it'll measure the width of that sheet, and if it's wider than the previous sheet, it goes, oh, hang on, there must be more than one page here, and it'll pause scanning and let you kind of pull that page out, pop it back in, and try and refeed it through, so you don't have to so you don't end up, after scanning like 150 pages, you realize, hang on, I've got a page missing, which page is it? And having to go back and go scan it all again. So that's a really good feature to have as well, which is actually only found on the higher end scanners or on dedicated document scanners. A lot of the printers that have built-in scanners don't have that feature, and they end up being kind of useless for that purpose, which is very annoying. And this is the app that I use on Windows, because on Mac, there actually isn't anything that I could find that was as nice as this app called Not Another PDF Scanner. And you can you feed in your pages into the scanner, and then you get like all these thumbnails of the page, and you can apply multiple fixes or bulk fixes at once. You can change, the sharpness, the brightness, contrast. You can rotate pages. You can do a deskew feature, which automatically analyzes the text on the page to make sure that the words are straight, because often the scanner might feed it in on a very slight angle, and then the words are like slanted. This will detect the images on the page and make sure that the writing's straight, and that's a really handy feature, because as you can see in this screenshot, some images are just not, they're the wrong way around. So if you auto rotate them using the rotate feature, it'll actually automatically put them all the right way, which saves heaps of time when you got like a 400-page book or something. Saves heaps of time. Yeah, and these are the bad old scanners. So you can see that they look like they're going to be handy. These cost me $5 each, and the other one cost me $10. But because there's heaps on eBay and country that people just want to just dump, but the drivers just don't work the way they should. You can go to the brother website or the producer website and it says, oh yeah, it supports Windows 10, supports macOS 10.14. But then you actually load it up and it's like, can't find scanner, or the driver is so old that it misses a lot of features in the modern versions of that same driver. So you don't get the backplate bleeding, you don't get the automatic deskew features, despite those scanners having them when they came out. So they actually removed it from the new driver, even though but the old driver still has it, but the old driver doesn't work on the modern operating system. So they're actually not really worth, like I spent days trying to get these to work with the older drivers, newer drivers, and it's just a big hassle. So it's stick to newer machines, to newer scanners. So the next step is to actually scan some magazines. once you've got them cut, once you've set up your scanning settings, you just pretty much pop them in the feeder and just let it go. Sometimes they do get jammed, and as a tip, you really do need to clean them. I didn't know you had to clean scanners, because what happens is all the paper that goes through it leaves paper dust, like the fibers of the paper. And if you don't clean these certain bits, you get double feeds, you get paper jams. If you don't clean the scanning element, so that kind of white bar there with the glass, that's the sensor. That's what picks up the paper and looks at it and turns it into an image on the computer. If you have dust on that, it's like when you take a photo with dust, you see this dust in the scan, and if it's in a certain spot over, like say 20 pages, you'll see in the same spot on 20 pages this annoying line, because the way that the scanner feeds it through, because it feeds it as a sheet through past this line, the same spot on every image will have this line through it. It gets very annoying. So you want to clean it. I do it every 1,000 pages, and I just use some like a glass cleaner. So for like the ones for my glasses, I'll use the same thing and use the sheet, these microfiber cloths, and you can see that kind of brown stain. It's just dust after like a few hundred pages. You don't might see it with your eyes, but it's on there, and the scanner knows, and you need to clean it to make sure everything goes smoothly. So the next step is to once you've got all your raw images, is to convert them to a format that the Internet Archive wants, and actually give it to the Internet Archive. And if you're not familiar with the Internet Archive, it's a glorious not-for-profit running in San Francisco that tries to archive the entire internet. So they want kind of like to remember everything that happened on the internet, so that in the future, if it disappears, they have a copy. If you've seen the Wayback Machine or archive.org, they're the organization responsible for that, and they have a massive data center in San Francisco that hosts that stores all the data, and they want people to upload things like this, music, movies, TV shows, software in particular. So if you make an app and you want it kind of kept for a long time, you can donate it to the Internet Archive, and they'll store it and preserve it and look after it, so people in the future can enjoy that software again. It was actually quite hard to figure out what format they would be best. They say all they want is like a PDF is fine, or images. They'll pretty much take whatever you have, but I wanted to give them the best kind of long-term, highest quality thing that I can. And technically that should be a PDFA. PDFA is the ISO standard for long-term document archival. And the whole point is that hopefully in 30 years, 50, 100 years, because the standard's well documented, people will know how to view that stuff. And part of it is it's a PDF with JPEG 2000 embedded. So JPEG 2000 is a lossless version of JPEG. So kind of like how there's MP4 audio, AAC audio, and Apple lossless. Same thing applies here. JPEG 2000, like a lossless version, which you think would be great because it's lossless. It will preserve that quality. What I found was that it was so slow to render in a PDF viewer. So if I made a PDF with JPEG 2000 images inside it, flicking through it was like scrolling through quicksand. Like on an iPad Pro, on an iMac Pro, it would take like 10 seconds for each page to render, which is just nobody wants to actually read that. So what I did instead was come up with this script, this little bash script, which is it looks like a bit of a mess, but I'll try and explain it bit by bit quickly. So the first step, it takes the TIFF files and uses an app called Mogrify, which is part of ImageMagick, and turns those TIFF files into JPEGs at quality 75, and also gets rid of any metadata. So it's just a JPEG file with no date, timestamps, exif info, whatever kind of junk the scanner might add to those TIFF files. Then it takes, now I use an app called Image to PDF to simply losslessly turn those JPEGs into a PDF. So it pretty much takes the JPEGs and puts them in a PDF wrapper, so you can view them in a PDF app. Lots of other PDF creating apps will actually recompress those images to fit in the PDF. So Adobe Acrobat will actually recompress the images. So if you're recompressing a JPEG, that's not a good idea. It'll look crappy. Whereas image to PDF won't do that, and does it very fast as well. Because it's not recompressing, it's just making a bit of metadata around those JPEGs to make it a PDF file format. Next step, I just compress the TIFF files into a gzip, and that's the reason I do that is I've got the PDF with the compressed JPEGs and the original 24-bit 600 DPI scans, and those two files are what gets uploaded to the Internet Archive. So that way they have the best of both worlds. There's a PDF at a reasonable size that people can view quickly, and it's more convenient to view. But there's also the massive, like each page is like 150 megabytes of these 24-bit 600 DPI TIFF files. And by compressing it down with gzip, you actually, it's about 40% to 50% compression. So what would have been maybe a 15 gig collection of TIFF files gets down to about 7 or 8. And then I actually compress them. I compress the TIFF files again to bzip2 for my own archive, because bzip2 is way more efficient than zip, but the Internet Archive only accepts zip files. But when I want to keep them on my computer, I want to keep them as bzip2 because they'll take up about 60% less space. So what would have been like a 10 gig archive becomes 4 gig, which is much better for me to store long term than those zip files, which are 5 gig or 6 gig. This longer command is to actually upload them to the Internet Archive. The Internet Archive has a Python file, a Python script to do bulk uploads. You can upload through their website, which is very easy, and it's a step-by-step process with a wizard. But when you've got 100 PDFs to upload and 100 zip files to upload, you don't want to do it one by one on a website. I actually tried that first, and it would time out a lot. But using the command line uploader is very easy, and it actually has a built-in retry feature. So in that way, if something happens, so the Internet Archive actually runs out of bandwidth quite on a regular basis. They've only got so much funds, but they're such a popular website that during peak times in the USA, it's just uploads just stop happening because it just ran out of bandwidth. So it's good that it'll automatically keep going where it left off. And I can set all the different metadata stuff. So for a book, for example, you might put in the ISBN. For a magazine, I just put in that it's a text type, because there's text, video, audio, and software and things like that. You give it a title, obviously, and a description, which is like an English description, just like these are uncompressed TIFF files are in the tar.gzip, and you might say thanks to whoever donated those magazines, or if you've got a story about the magazines, you might add a story in there. That's a human readable description and tags and the language that it's in. There's literally hundreds of different metadata areas on the Internet Archive, and the more you can put in, the better, because then that helps people find it easier. And then the last step is when it's finished sending the zip file and the PDF to the Internet Archive, the scripts will delete the PDF from my computer, remove the zip file from my computer, and it'll also left a bit out. But the next step is it'll send the bzip2 file to a different folder, and then delete the original TIFFs and delete the JPEGs. So it kind of cleans up everything after itself. And the result is, after about an hour or two, the Internet Archive will turn the PDF into a whole bunch of different formats. So the first file, the 15 gig one, is the uncompressed images. The second file, the PDF, is the one that I made, and the rest are all automatically made by the Internet Archive, who make a bunch of XML files, who make an OCR version as well, so people who just want the text can search by the text in the magazine. And that's quite nice how their scripts all do that for you. And the result is, if this link works, you get an article like this. So this is a wide magazine that I scanned in, and you can flick through it quite fast. If I left these as a PDF-A in JPEG 2000, this is so slow to happen. Like you turn the page and it will just chug and chug and chug. Even though the file size is quite low, the rendering engines for JPEG 2000 are just crap. And you can see the metadata and all the things, and yeah, and that's what happens. The whole point is to get lots of these kind of things up on the archive. So once they're up on the archive, that's all nice. Everyone can enjoy them. You know, they're there now. But the problem is, you've spent all this time trying to scan them and keep them. Do you want to lose them in case the Internet Archive goes away? They're in San Francisco. There's only one copy of them, as far as I know. San Francisco has a lot of earthquakes. there's a non-zero chance of their data center being ripped apart and falling into a big hole. So and I like to do backups on the 3-2-1 system. I like to have 3 copies of any data. 1 copy is mine on my server, 1 copy is on the Internet Archive, and 1 copy should be offsite from my house somewhere. And at the moment, they're living on OneDrive, because OneDrive, I get 1 terabyte free with Office 365, and I'm not really using it, so I can store up to 1 terabyte there. But now, as you can see, I've got 1.5 terabytes now. So I kind of ran out of space on there. So I have to think about, what am I going to do? How do I store this stuff? And my hypothesis was I wanted to store 5 terabytes for 10 years as like a reference point for how long will this data cost me if I get more of it, and I want to keep it for a long term. The natural choice is to pick a cloud hosting service like Azure or Google. AWS, their deep glacier service, is the cheapest of all the cloud stuff that I've seen. For 10 years, 5 terabytes, it would cost me almost $1,000 for storage. Where they really get you is if you want to restore that data. So if you want to pull 5 terabytes out of Deep Glacier, it'll cost you $733 in addition to what you've paid for the storage, which you know, you hope you never need to, but the whole point of a backup is that you can get to it, and it's going to cost you that much money. It makes it quite expensive as an overall package. The next option I thought of was, what about I just put a NAS at my parents' place and use something like, or just an SSH file copy whenever I have new data. That would cost me $850 for a NAS and 2 hard drives. Or I can just put the hard drive stored at my parents' place. So it's not online, it's not automatic. I have to manually copy data and just leave the hard drive there. That'll be about $400. And there's this cool, which I found, this cool case. Like, it's a case, like a metal case that's like waterproof and shockproof and anti-static. That costs about $40, and you can pop hard drives in there. And that's a pretty cool looking case, which is pretty neat. I thought, which would be great to just store. Like, hey mum, here's a box. Don't open it. Don't touch it. Just leave it in the corner, please. And then there's Blu-ray discs, which if I want to store again 5 terabytes for 10 years, I would need almost $1,000 to buy 50 of these discs. They're special. They're called N discs, and they're designed to last a millennium, which I doubt, but they're archival quality. So unlike CDRs back in the day or DVDRs back in the day, these don't use any kind of dye. They use like they actually etch into a physical thing, whereas in other cheaper discs, they burn a laser into dye because the dye is a lot cheaper. And the dye often runs or leaks or spoils after a certain amount of years. That's not supposed to happen with these discs, but they've been on the market for about 10 years. So who knows how long they actually last. But again, if you're going to use a Blu-ray disc, these are the cheapest. These are the best ones. Then there's tapes, old school tapes. They're the cheapest option, as you can see. $270 for a tape drive, the tapes, and a SAS controller card. But ultimately, I went with the tape drives, but it did not go well. They are not good. On my blog, I wrote this post about them, and if you want to know the whole full story, you can read that post because it's quite tedious. But it's essentially, they just come up with heaps of errors. Like the tapes are just not reliable. These are brand new tapes in a clean, maintained tape drive, and I couldn't write to them. They were just can't constantly come up with read-write errors, and I can't trust a backup medium that's going to do that to me. So right now I'm back on the drawing board as to what to do to back up these offsite files. I'm not 100% sure. I'm probably going to put them up on a big Glacier just because it's easy. I can do it now and just not have to think about it. But it's the most expensive option as well. So I don't really want to spend a lot of money on this hobby because it's already costing me a lot of money in the scanners and extra storage at home and all this kind of stuff. So if you've got any ideas, let me know. So yeah, that's it. That's the stock image that I forgot to change on the keynote slides, but it's a nice looking pasta anyway. I'm Decryption on Twitter. You can read more about I've written about this stuff in a bit more detail on my blog, decryption.net.au. And if you think that you'd want to do this as well, if you think you've got a pile of old magazines or a pile of old books that you think should be on the Internet Archive, if you need a hand, please get in touch. I'm happy to help. I think it's important to get as we get older, a lot of us, I've done a lot of you guys for almost like 10, 15 years now. As we get older, a lot of this stuff will fade away. It's important to kind of preserve what we've been doing with our lives for the past 15, 20 years, because one day we'll be dead and people will just forget what we did. So I think it's important to kind of keep that now while we're still senile, because if you wait too long, we just won't be able to. So yeah, thank you.